Hi guys, I hope you guys are well. Happy 2025. I hope 2024 was good and that you're ready for 2025. So I just want to make a video. I'm probably going to make a few videos just talking about the lessons that I've learned in 2024, taking them to 2025. So one of the big things that I learned that stuck out to me was that life is for living, not surviving. A lot of us in life, we're stuck in the surviving zone. There is a period of time where life happens and you have to survive from point A to point B. But what God has intended is for us to live life and to live life in full abundance. So what that means is He wants us to live, not just to survive. So I'm gonna make a series of videos just talking about my own personal experiences, or what I learned from my own personal experiences about living life, enjoying life as God has intended, because He's our Father and He's our Dad, and He really wants us to enjoy life. He wants us to savor life. He wants us to live, to be alive and well, and to experience His goodness, to experience His miracles, to experience the beauty of who He is. So, one point that I'll make just for today that I'll share is that God is dynamic. So what that means is that I have learned to listen to the Holy Spirit when God says it's time to move, it's time to change, it's time to turn. You must be on point with the Holy Spirit to the extent that when God says you've been in this place for too long, it's time for you to move on, you will hear that God has said that it's time for you to move on, and you will move on. Because what happens is sometimes you'll be stuck to a place, to a situation, to a job, to a friendship, to a relationship, because of the fact that it was beautiful, it was God sent, it was miraculous, it was, it was what you needed, it was a lifeline, it was what you needed at a certain point in your life. But you have to understand that God is dynamic. The things that He has for you, the life that He has for you is constantly moving, changing, growing, moving from one level to another, from one season to another season. So you have to be attuned to the Holy Spirit to hear when when God says, you can no longer be in this place, it's time to move. And a lot of us get hung up on the love story of how you got into the situation, how you got the job, how you ended up with the friendship, how you end up with the connections, how, we get hung up and so caught up in that we are unable to realize when God says it's time to move. You are unable to realize when God says, okay, you've been in the desert too long, because you're still stuck in how beautiful it was when God took you out of Egypt. But you've been in the desert too long. It's time for you to get up and go to the promised land. And when the time comes, you have to be in the position to move, because His grace will be with you in the next phase. So sometimes what happens is you're in a situation that used to be so beautiful, but all of a sudden, it's not that the situation has changed, but you no longer have tolerance for the place, no longer have tolerance for the person, no longer have tolerance for the situation. Because sometimes you have stayed in a place, in a relationship, in a friendship, in anything for too long, and God is telling you that it's time to move, and His grace has already moved on to the next season. So you find that you're stuck in a place where you should have moved already, but you haven't. Now you're getting frustrated, you're no longer happy, you're sinking into a depression, you're no longer living, you're now surviving, because the grace of God has moved on to the next season where you're supposed to be. And it's really hard for us to let go sometimes of a situation that we feel like God opened doors for us. But you have to remember that God is growth, God is productive, God is multiplication and fruitfulness. And it's about moving from one point to the other, growing and becoming what God has called you to be. God is not He's not stagnant. There has to be movement, there has to be growth. And sometimes we get stuck in a place just because we're still in love with the story, or still loyal to the story of how you got into the situation. But it's no longer that anymore. God is telling you that it's time to move on, so you can start living again and move out of survival mode, because now you're in survival mode. You're no longer, He took you out of Egypt. You're now in the desert, but it's time to move from the desert into the promised land. That is the nature of who God is. So it's very important to spend time in the Word this year and seek and know when God is saying, okay, it's time to move. Because sometimes sometimes it'll be so quick because there is a person that God needs you to turn to look at, so that that person is the one that God has put in your path for you to be able to move on to the next phase of what God has for you. And you have to move to align with what God is wanting to do for you next week. But you have to have moved to be in the right place, so that when next week comes and whatever situation is supposed to meet you will meet you. So it's very important. Spend time in your word, spend time praying, spend time reassessing your situation, and ask God to lead you, to guide you, so that you don't find yourself being frustrated, trying to survive when you're supposed to live, because you're still stuck in a place where God is saying, we're no longer here, we've moved on. So that's the 2 cents I want to share about stuff that I've learned about living and not just surviving. So until next time, have an awesome day.